everyone. I'm Ian McCarthy of Lifting for Life, and today I would like to talk to you about grinding versus sleep. And before I get into that, I want to apologize for my recent absence on YouTube and acknowledge that I think I psych myself out as a result of an underlying belief that all of my videos must be excellent. And the result of this is that the overall quality of the content I put out diminishes in that there's a lot of good content I could be making that I'm not. So what I'm going to endeavor to do moving forward is move back toward that which I've done in the past and which feels most authentic to me, which is a lot of content like this, sit-down, informative content, which I'm totally aware bores a lot of people, but I thrive doing it, and I know that there's a certain small block of people who find value in it, and I would rather continue doing this than try doing something that just doesn't click for me and results in me doing so much less good than I think I can do. So with that classically overly long intro out of the way, I made a post on Facebook earlier today saying that fatigue degrades self-control, and that in order to improve adherence, sleep more, or sleep more for better adherence. And a friend of mine, Evan Godby, made a comment on this or about this, mentioning that we in the community seem to be getting mixed signals on this at this point. On the one hand, some people are talking about sleeping more, sleep is very important, you need your rest, etc. And there's a meme of sleep less and grind and work harder, etc. And I think this is a really important issue, and one around which there are misunderstandings which I think are detrimental to folks. So first of all, I want to say that I understand where people are coming from when they talk about this. I think the analysis is something like, you have 24 hours in a day, there's no way to get around that, we're not going to have a 28-hour day. And if you desire to be more successful, whether you're an entrepreneur or if someone's a student or if they're working a 9-to-5 job, whatever it might be, that one way to do that is to literally spend more time working. And if you're currently sleeping 8 hours a day, those are 8 hours in which you're definitely not working. And if you reduce that to 6 hours, those are 2 additional hours which you could use working, and all else being equal, you're better off. You have 2 more hours working. Now, I think there's a major error in that thinking. And first, that's my sense of what one would think in saying that. And I could be incorrect in that perception. But if that's the case, I think the issue is that it assumes, or it doesn't properly account for, the detrimental effects of the loss of the 2 hours of sleep. It's very different to taking 2 hours in which let's use a really clean example, like one where there are minimal confounders. Let's say that to begin with, you have 2 hours in which you read, but whatever you're reading doesn't benefit your schoolwork, doesn't benefit your job, etc. And if you take those 2 hours and direct them toward reading something which is relevant to your work, everything is the same except for what you are reading. So the opportunity cost is only not reading that thing which is of less significance. The thing about sleep is the loss of 2 hours of sleep will, assuming you don't need the 2 hours, and I'll come back to that, that will result in that extra time you're using working and all the rest of the time that you're using working to be used less efficiently because you're going to be more tired. So I know of 2 studies on this that I'm going to fully acknowledge that I don't recall the authors, I don't recall the titles off the top of my head. It's been a while since I've looked at these. I will look for them, and if I find them, I will post about them likely on Facebook and Instagram. But one had 2 different groups. One was sleep deprived and one wasn't. And then productivity was compared. And you certainly have to ask the question of how is that going to be measured? But the result was the groups were comparably productive, even though one group was awake 2 hours longer and working 2 hours longer, because the sleep deprivation that results in decreased efficiency. So we're talking about more time working, probably enjoying it less because you're tired, efficiency is degraded, you do the same amount of work. So in my mind, the people sleeping more, think about it, they're sleeping more, so they're going to feel better, they're working less in terms of time, and they're accomplishing the same. And that scales or is very consistent with my experience and the experience of everyone I've ever talked to about this. I know of another study which I think this might have been one which Greg Nuckols talked about in a video, but I could definitely be wrong about that, in which subjects were sleep deprived by 2 hours a night. And what was really interesting was they were initially aware of their sleep deprivation. And by the way, the effects of the sleep deprivation were tested. They were made to do short-term memory tests or something like this. And interestingly, the subjects were initially accurately aware of the effects of the sleep deprivation. Their subjective perception of how impaired they were was correct in that it was the same as that which was objectively measured. But as they became more sleep deprived, as their sleep debt increased, because think about it, if you require 8 hours of sleep a night and you get 6 hours of sleep a night every single night, that isn't, oh, you are 2 hours sleep deprived. Your sleep debt is 2 hours the first day, then 4, then 6. It becomes progressively worse. And that's what was shown in this study. And as the subjects became more sleep deprived, they were less and less aware of how impaired their functioning was. So not only are you going to be sleep deprived, but it gets worse with time. So I think the clear conclusion from this, and again, I acknowledge that I'm not directly referencing the studies, but I think even if we come at this even if we put that aside and come at this from an anecdotal perspective, that's completely consistent with, again, the experience of everyone I've ever talked to about this. Less time sleeping, if that means less sleep that you actually need. Now, it's different, by the way, if potentially you have someone oversleeping and they will actually operate better with less sleep. I mean, I've so experimented with my sleep that I've figured out that to be the case for me. If I sleep too much, I actually seem to be more fatigued. I feel like I never quite wake up. So that's obviously a situation in which you have a really good argument for sleeping less. That sleep isn't additionally benefiting you. It might actually be having a detrimental effect. And that's time where you're not able to do anything else because you're sleeping. But that's different to you need the sleep and you're getting less than you need. Because again, I think the practical implication is going to be, first and foremost, you will feel worse, which is a huge loss. And then if you just view it from the perspective of productivity, whatever the metric is for you, that yes, you can have more time to direct toward doing sales if that's what you're doing, studying, and so on. But if you're using that time less efficiently, then you don't know that you're actually going to get more done. So my suggestion is put self-care first, and that's indeed be willing to sacrifice those other things to some extent if it means addressing self-care because of how hugely important it is. And the way I just phrased that was be willing to sacrifice, but interestingly, I found, and I'm not sure that I've yet spoken to someone about this for whom their experience is different, that prioritizing self-care naturally results in you being as productive as you can be. Which brings me to a point that I think is important to realize here, which is, in my experience, the people who talk about sleeping less, not sleeping, and so on, I think that might be really good advice for them, but they are the outliers. So, just to give an example, because it's the only one that actually comes to mind, Gary Vaynerchuk has said sleep less. He's also said that he catches up on sleep at various points and so on, but I get the sense that he is one of the minority of people who 6 hours of sleep a night on average is ideal for him. So what that means is 6 hours a night on average for him is perfect. Like that, it's a restatement of the same thing. Like more would be inappropriate precisely because he doesn't need it. It would be wasted time. But you have to recognize the context. So to use an analogy which comes to mind, and there's certainly a risk in me bringing this up, but I don't bring this up to say that I'm awesome. I think I'm awesome. You should perceive me as awesome. But it's real, and so I hope that it's a good illustration. It is objectively the case that I have an above average IQ. This is something which it's not. I didn't take a test online. Very thorough testing was done 3 years back, and that is true of me in the way that it's true that I'm 5'9". At the same time, my attention is relatively really bad. Comparing my attention as a percentile to, and they're rigorous tests for that, relative to my IQ. So that gives you a certain profile of like what this brain is like. So imagine if someone were to, and that's going to have implications about how I learn, how I think, how I best work, and so on. Now imagine if someone with an exactly average IQ and attention that perfectly matches that were to ask me a question about how best to learn about a certain topic. It wouldn't be appropriate for me to just tell them exactly what I do. Now, I could tell it to them in the sense of, this is what I do, it works for me, but be aware it's probably not going to be perfect for you. That's quite different. But if I were to say, well, this is the way I do it and this is the way you do it, that would be inappropriate because there is a relevant difference between me and that person. And similarly, let's come at it from a negative perspective about me, just to emphasize the fact I'm not wanting to posture it. Well, I don't desire to posture myself as superior. If Phil Heath were to say, well, I almost never, he said this, he doesn't train his arms the whole year except for 4 weeks out from the Olympia. I don't know if that's currently the case, but he has said that in the past. That if you were to just say to me as not Phil Heath, not only am I not Phil Heath, but I'm not the genetic elite, I'm not genetically above average. If you were to say, well, the way you make your arms as big as they possibly can be is you don't train them for the entire year except for 4 weeks before when you want them to be really big. I think everyone would recognize that that would be horrendous advice. Similarly, if you take the person who's at the end of the continuum in terms of how much sleep they need to be maximally recuperated, and then you have them give advice to most of the people, certainly like even more so the people on the other end of the continuum, but even most of the people in the middle of the bell curve, if they just say, this is what I do and this is what you should do, I think that's going to pan out really poorly for most people. So in wanting to make this more actionable and not just me rambling as happens, my suggestion is experiment with sleep, when you sleep, how long you sleep, and so on, how long you work each day, when you do different activities, while being very systematic, just as you would with changing training volume, changing number of days a week you lift weights, changing anything else. You want to be systematic about it, so it shouldn't be changing 6 things at a time, and then this seems to happen, so you change 4 of those things and a couple of other different things. But make changes and be typically slowly less changes at a time, being very attentive to the results of those changes, and then make adjustments on that basis. So if you find that when you get 10 hours of sleep in a 24-hour period and you are able to make that happen somehow, I think the most reasonable conclusion is that's what you need to do. Like, the fact that I feel best with 8 to 9 doesn't have, it has nothing to do with you. Like, it shouldn't matter whatsoever. You shouldn't, it might be something to think about, but it wouldn't be the determinant of how long you sleep. And the fact that some people are fine with 6, again, shouldn't be the determinant of what you do. Similarly, if you're the person who, I had a childhood friend who was like this. He told me, and I don't have good reason to doubt what he said, that he slept about, and I know that he slept 4 hours a night, many nights. And he said that when he slept more, he felt more tired. So if that was in fact the case, then the appropriate conclusion is that's what he should do. And I think most people are going to land in the middle. So I don't think we should be having the discussion of sacrificing sleep to spend more time working. It should be sleep as long as you need, and certainly are able to. You have to consider everything else going on in your life. To be as rested as you can be, to be as efficient as you can be with the time you spend working. That's a good cue to end the video. Thanks so much. Like the video if you found value in it. Comment below. See you again soon.